Rust never sleeps, especially in the eastern half of the United States and most definitely in the southeast where I'm located. Here it's so routinely hot and humid, we often joke about our air you can wear. Rust isn't something that you want creeping into your woodworking skills, and it's definitely not something you want getting on your tools. But unfortunately, it does happen. In these videos, we'll take a look at products and processes for both rust removal and prevention. To watch the prevention video, click the link above. But for now, let's focus on rust removal. Rust happens. It happens to all of us, and it shows no preference to which tool it gets on. What I have here is, let me be clear, this was lent to me for the production of this video. I know it's a Lee Nielsen, go easy. But this is a perfect example of what can happen when life leads you away from woodworking for a little while. But luckily, I have plenty of products on deck from Highland Woodworking to both demonstrate methods of rust removal and restore this great tool to its proper state. Any and all rust removal is going to involve a fair amount of elbow grease. While there are products that will help to loosen the rust, anything that would be strong enough to remove it outright would be much too strong for home use, and also probably isn't something you would want to handle or put onto your tools. Because you are going to be sanding, and you know that up front, it's important to begin with the end in mind. Choosing where to start in terms of abrasives depends on the level of rust to remove. It is easy to start with a finer abrasive and drop down to more aggressive ones than to start with an aggressive abrasive and then have to remove those scratches on your way back to a polished tool. Before we get started with this plane, we'll take a look at all the weapons at our disposal and then formulate a plan of attack. First up is sandpaper. Now, you can use standard woodworking sandpaper like aluminum oxide or garnet grit, but that paper is designed to be used dry. Wet, dry paper stands up to water or solvent better than standard sandpaper. Sanding wet using either water or an oil or solvent reduces airborne sanding dust and helps to keep the paper from loading as quickly and is often a first choice for sanding off rust. The higher grits of wet, dry are made from silicon carbide. The silicone grit particles are harder and longer wearing for sanding metal, and the paper can hold together longer when using it wet. Next up are nylon scrubbing pads. These pads are available in different grades, from extra coarse to fine. Because the pads are a nylon material, they don't scratch like sandpaper grit, but behave much like steel wool in abrasive terms. And not being steel, if you use them with water, any stray fibers won't rust. Scotch-Brite pads are useful in taking care of light amounts of tarnish on steel surfaces and work well on softer metals like brass, bronze, aluminum, and copper. The pads are easily cut to any size you need just using a pair of scissors. A unique product called a rust eraser gives you a built-in palm-sized rubber hand sanding pad that's embedded with silicone carbide abrasive. The rubber matrix has a little give, so it will mold or wear slightly to fit small contours. They excel at removing light rust, stains, and tarnish from your squares, rules, clamps, and other tools in the shop. Toss them in a tool bag to have readily available abrasive pads when on the job site. Rust-free is a light acid that helps loosen heavier accumulations of rust and gives you a head start in removing rust. Obviously, when handling any acids, it is important to use proper precautions like disposable gloves and eye protection. As a side note, anytime you have a liquid shipped to you, you should open the shipping box immediately and stand the bottle upright on a surface that can handle some spillage or leakage from shipping, preferably not your furniture or machine tables. Next up is high-quality steel wool by Liberon. Compared to your garden variety hardware store steel wool, this 4/0 steel wool by Liberon is super silky and nearly oil-free. It leaves a much finer scratch pattern than standard steel wool of the same grade. Never Dull is a polish that consists of a cotton-like material rolled up in a can for easy dispensing. The fabric is impregnated with petroleum solvent. You can easily tear off as much or as little as you need. It removes tarnish and lets you polish and buff up chrome and plated surfaces to a nice shine. It won't remove heavy corrosion, but it's very gentle and won't scratch. This is a great starting point for a steel tool with some light surface degradation. If it works, you haven't abraded the surface too heavily, And if not, you can always drop down to a more aggressive abrasive. After reviewing these products and their strengths and uses, I think my plan of attack for this plane is going to be to start with a light coat of rust-free to remove some of the heavier accumulations. Then I'll move to the wet-dry sandpaper, starting at a low to medium grit and move up through those grits to remove all the rust and restore some polish. Then we'll use some of the finer abrasives to put that fine polish back on this beautiful tool. So here I'm applying the rust-free product, just spraying all over the tool and a little heavier in the areas where the rust is accumulated, just to begin to break it down and give me a head start on removing it. I then move to the wet-dry paper, and I am using a granite lapping stone here to make sure that I'm keeping a flat reference surface, and I'm lubricating with Camilla oil. So you can see from the 220 we kind of quickly remove that surface rust, but we have some scratch patterns that we need to remove. So we move up to 400 grit paper. Again, working all the sides. I've cut a lot of the video here obviously and sped it up for purpose of time, but I did work all of the surfaces relatively evenly. Next, I wanted to move to 800 and then to 1200 grit. So again, working all the sides and wiping down in between to check the progress, and you can see now that the rust is pretty much gone, and now we're really just working on polish. So after the 1200 we move up to 2500 because hey, I've got it, right? So might as well put it on there. So with the 2500, I'm really not putting a lot of pressure down. This is strictly a polish paper. We're not really removing any material at this point. We're strictly removing scratches from the previous grits. So here I've just grabbed the plane iron. It had just a touch of surface rust on it, and I think I used 800 grit for this, and it came off really easily. I just I was able to work that iron really quickly. So now to assembly, the handle was broken, so we've got a new rear handle here for the Lie-Nielsen plane, which is going in, and then just putting everything else back together, getting everything snugged and tight. I did apply Camilla oil to the inside of the plane there and wiped it down really good before reassembly, and here I'm applying Camilla oil and wiping down to finish up. Well, unfortunately, rust removal is something that I have a great deal of experience with. However, we were able to restore this Lie-Nielsen plane to its intended level of shine. There was a little bit of pitting, but it won't affect the performance of the tool. And overall, I'm happy with the results, and I'm sure the owner will be happy to get this back. Now, a couple of things happened throughout this process that I expected and some that I didn't. And I wanted to give you my candid opinion on a few of these products. They're all really great, all of them. A couple stood out. These nylon pads were really surprising in their efficiency in removing some surface tarnish from carving gouges and things like that. I was very surprised at how easily I was able to just remove that surface tarnish and restore a polish to my carving gouges. So those I would definitely check out. They come in different grits, so grab a handful of those just to keep on hand. Rust tarnish seems to get on carving gouges all the time in my shop. I'm sure it's no different in yours. This rust-free product, this gets my 100% approval. I would definitely recommend that you give this a try if you're doing any sort of rust removal or restoration. I am very accustomed to removing rust with wet-dry paper, and I can tell when the rust comes off easier. Almost always I'll start with 220 or lower because I just want to get the rust off, and I'll spend the extra time with the higher grits if I really want to put a polish on the tool. But in the early stages, I just want to get that rust off. I really could have started with a higher grit after using that rust-free. I was very surprised at that. All these tools, all these removal products were great. The rust erasers, very good for conforming to a shape. That's great for removing rust from your squares, your rulers, things like that that just pick up rust through normal use. I did at the end put a little bit of Camilla oil on this plane to prevent this from happening again. You can check out that on our prevention video by clicking the link above. And make sure to check out the whole line of rust prevention and removal products at highlandwoodworking.com.